And it is my pleasure to introduce Sajan George.
Great intro. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Last night I was at dinner with Paul and a few of you, and I was just so impressed with just the vulnerability and boldness that you men shared, and it sort of challenges me this morning to do the same. I want to talk to you about calling. I'm going to share with you, kind of re-narrate. Now, a lot of this, I didn't know he was going to do all that, but I'm going to re-narrate that, share with you a little bit about my calling. And what I want you to understand is, if you get nothing else out of today, remember this, which is, oftentimes we men think of calling as a destination. Like, I've figured out my calling. This is what I'm to do. And calling is actually much more of a journey than a destination. It's something you never actually reach, but you can get better and better, clearer and clearer about the pursuit of it. And there are these mile markers along our journey. With the benefit of some hindsight and reflection, I'll share with you those mile markers in my own life. And at the very end, I'll share with you a framework that I used and have used, and that hopefully may be helpful to you in thinking about your own calling and your own pursuit of what God desires for you. Because in the end, I think our calling is really about realizing better and better versions of ourselves. Part of becoming more and more like Christ is that in some ways it becomes less of us and more of Him. And that doesn't mean we actually deny our personality or our gifts or our passions. But when those become beautifully intertwined with God's grace and Christ's love and beauty and passion, you have this new man, this new person in Christ that continually reflects Him more and more. So, as Paul said, my journey started. I joined Arthur Anderson out of college after grad school. My dad was a college professor. He actually grew up in India, came here and studied, went to undergrad, grad, and eventually got his PhD. The first job he got was in Canada. He was on a student visa, so he took it. It was either that or go back to India. My mom was a nurse. Neither of them had a background in business or finance or accounting, but that just seemed to be where I was drawn. And so that's where I had started to develop skills. And my parents were always generous about helping people. And something about that sort of stuck in my DNA. So when my classmates were going off to investment banking or management consulting, I heard this guy speak about, he was from Arthur Anderson and their turnaround group, and he talked about using his skills to turn around companies, going into situations that were in crisis, trying to avoid bankruptcy, and to try to salvage what was there. And I got hooked. I remember coming out of his talk thinking, that's what I want to do. And so for the next 9 years or so, that's what I did. We went into companies that were in crisis and turned them around, and I loved it. But at the culmination of sort of 2002, we got acquired by Alvarez and Marsal, and I was starting to wonder, is this what I'm supposed to do? The travel was always Monday to Thursday. It was on the road. The culture environment of a Wall Street firm was just constantly, about how many hours you're billing and what your retainers were. And as you progressed up in the firm, that intensity just got more and more. And I was starting to question, God, is this what you want from me? Is this the best that I can do? And around that time, at Alvarez & Marsal, we had this crazy opportunity. The St. Louis Public School District, they had a new school board elected that was backed by the mayor. 7 members of the board, 4 seats came up for election. The mayor put together a slate of 4 candidates. They were tired of a broken, dysfunctional school system, and so they ran together, formed a majority bloc. One of those 4 members was the former 2-term mayor, sits on a number of corporate boards, and said, you know what? I sit on these corporate boards, and when they get into trouble, they hire these turnaround firms. These guys are great. They come in, they diagnose the problem, they develop a solution, they execute the solution as interim management, and then they leave. They're not looking for long-term jobs. So, in a sort of radical move, they hired us. Myself and 3 other colleagues, knowing nothing about education, found ourselves holding the keys to St. Louis Public Schools, 4th largest employer in the city, $400 million budget, operating budget, 6,000, 7,000 employees. And what we realized was the district not only was academically failing, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. Like literally about 11 days away from bouncing payroll. That's how dysfunctional it was. I didn't know what to do. I'd never, ever, none of us had. And so I went back to sort of your core skills that you learn as a turnaround professional. And I said to the folks in the district, I said, what day do you cut checks here? They said, we cut them on Wednesdays. I said, great. I want to see every check on Tuesday before it goes out. And they looked at me and they said, what are you, crazy? We're a $400 million organization. Do you know how many checks it is? And I said, the only way I'm going to understand what's happening in this place is see where the money goes. You can tell me about your mission and vision and all that in these nice brochures, but show me where you spend your money in that, and I'll begin to understand your priorities. Just a quick anecdote. So Tuesday they come in with this giant wheelbarrow of checks that are printed, ready to go out the door, and they're laughing. They like kind of shove it in and have fun. So I'm buried behind this massive pile. Literally, you can't see my head. And it's late, and I'm going through them one by one. And this is just one of many anecdotes. I'm looking at this overtime request for a gardener. It wasn't very big. It was, I don't know how much, but let's say it's a couple $100. So I call somebody into the office and I say, hey, it must be late, and my eyes are blurry, but I got an overtime request for a gardener. I said, we have gardeners on our payroll? And the district person's like, oh yeah, they water the plants in the schools. I was like, okay. Why would a gardener need overtime? It's not like suddenly he wakes up and there's way more plants than there was the day before. And they say, matter of factly, oh, that's for on Saturdays when they water the greenhouse. And I said, we own a greenhouse? They go, oh yeah, that's how the plants get in the schools. I said, really? Can I see the greenhouse? Yeah, sure. Downtown St. Louis, it was like a botanical garden. So we sold the greenhouse for about $2 million. They can grow their own plants in the schools. And that was just an example of the kind of things we started to unpack and unwind. We took $90 million out of a $400 million operating budget without laying off a single teacher. It was so fascinating, the experiment of this private management firm operating a public school district. Wall Street Journal was following us. PBS did a news story. President Bush, at the time, he came down and visited us. His Secretary of Education, Rod Page, came 3 times in a 12-month period. It had never been done before. Somewhere along that process, I got hooked. I realized, wow, here's a way to apply my skills in a redemptive way. And so we formed an education practice. That was our first one. New Orleans had called us after that saying, hey, we saw the work you did in St. Louis. Would you come here? This was 3 months before Katrina hit, okay? So and nobody knew Katrina was going to hit. And again, we're fumbling through this. I clearly don't know how to completely turn around an entire city. So one of the jobs when we got there this summer was just to get a quick assessment. Think of it like a balance sheet review. In a district, your balance sheet are your schools. So I physically started going to every school and just to try to figure out what's there, what are the conditions, how do we improve this? And the conditions were deplorable. I mean, the schools were filthy. It looked like third world environments that these teachers were working in. There were teachers who were literally bringing toilet paper from home because the schools couldn't afford to stock the employee bathroom with toilet paper. During this tour of schools, I had developed this relationship with this one person in the teachers union. And we somehow kind of connected. And he said, hey, we have a union hall meeting on Thursday. Would you come by? And maybe you're the new management, maybe you could address them. I said, sure, happy to do that. I was finishing my tour of schools on the West Bank, and rather than going to the other side of the city, I thought I'd get to the Union Hall a few minutes early because I was on that side of town. So I get there, Union Hall, union leaders up front, not my friend, but the sort of the head of the union. And the membership is all in this big hall. I kind of walk in at the back. I'm just listening to him. He's up front. And he's giving them the rah-rah, red meat sort of speech. And towards the end, he says, and those bastards from Alvarez and Marcel, if they think they're going to come here and tell us what we're going to... And he didn't know I was in the room. I don't even know if he knew I was going to speak after him. But they're not going to tell us, these New York corporate raiders. And of course, everybody's cheering him. I look over at my friend, who at this time is like, oh my gosh. He gets up there, and his job is to introduce me, and all he says is, "I'd now like to introduce Sajan George from Alvarez and Marcel," and he quickly gets off the stage. So I literally am walking from about that red bench up to the podium, and I quickly take the speech that I had prepared, and I shove it back in, and I remember praying, and I say, "God, I got about 5 nanoseconds before this room is going to light me up. So you're going to have to give me a sense of what to say to them." And so I get up there and I said, I thought I was going to say a few things to you, and let me just tell you how I spent today, and let me tell you how I spent the last 2 weeks. I've probably been to more schools than any of you in this room. There was about 100 some odd schools. I said I've gotten to about 87 of them. I'll get to 100 in the next week. I just want to share with you what I've seen. And I just said, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted at the conditions that you have to work in. And I said, it's deplorable. I've never seen anything this bad. And I said, look, I'm not going to stand up here and make you promises that I can't deliver. And I'm not going to, give you anything that's going to make you feel very much better. It's a broken system. We're in a crisis, and we got to figure this out. I said, but I'll give you one promise. One promise. I said, here's the promise. The thing that really bothered me the most is the fact that the employee bathrooms didn't even have toilet paper. To me, that's just a basic, common level of decency that you have to be afforded. So if I do nothing else, I will personally make sure, and if I have to personally deliver toilet paper to all 100 schools, I will do that before the first day of school. And I left the podium to a standing ovation. There was a guy in the room that was from the press who picked up the story. A week later, I was actually in Baton Rouge testifying before the legislation on what our school budget and our school appropriation. And the Senate committee stopped and said, I just want to make sure in this appropriation there's enough money for toilet paper for Mr. George. And then a number of businesses stepped forward and started providing supplies because the story took. And then Katrina hit, and then we began to rebuild the system from scratch, rethinking the entire system away. And then we went to New York City, and I had a chance to work with Joel Klein, who was working for Mayor Bloomberg, and it was the start of Bloomberg's second term. And nobody, including himself, thought he would come back for a third term. He couldn't at the time. And so they really wanted to sort of push the needle. And so we designed this, we tried to incubate a new kind of system where we treated the principals like the CEO of their building. And we had this idea that if we gave them autonomy, gave them their budget, and said, you spend the money either way. Central's not going to decide for you. Curriculum, okay? We had to finagle around the teacher union contract, but we basically said, you can spend the money the way you want, but we're going to hold you accountable to outcomes. So you don't meet these outcomes, we're going to give you a letter grade, A, B, C, D, or F. And if you get a D or an F 2 years in a row, we can fire you. So the principal union, it's New York City, so even the principals have a union, said, no, you can't do this. This performance contract, what are you kidding me? We have a union contract. So there was, we piloted this with 100 brave principals. 100 principals came forward and said, screw the union, I like this deal. Hold me accountable. You give me the freedom to execute. I don't have to deal with all these district rules. I'll take it. So against the advice of their union, these 100 brave principals stepped forward and said, we'll take the deal. So for an entire year, myself and my team serviced the heck out of those 100 principals. Man, they had a problem. We were Johnny on the spot. Whatever that issue was, we tore down structures, completed different processes, everything to make it and then we started systemizing that in a way that could make it a little bit more efficient. Well, over the course of that year, those principals, it got so good. Like the deal was so much better. The Joel Klein and his brilliance, when we went the next year to sort of invite principals to participate in this, again, he's like, well, let's just make it voluntary. We won't force anybody to do it, but anybody who wants to, they can opt in. And all 1,400 principals across all 5 boroughs said, we'll take the deal. And so they flipped the system. So then, and then we went to Washington, D.C., and Michelle Rhee, and then we went to Detroit. And about the end of that sort of next 9-year run, I started getting, again, that same kind of frustration. And the frustration I was having was this work was really high impact, really, really high profile, but I was starting to question the sustainability of it. It just seemed like we'd do this great work, and then there'd be an election, and a new leader would come in, and we'd wonder if the work would stay. And then and in places where it was staying, like in New Orleans and New York City, it was so difficult to scale to other cities, to find leaders at the top with that kind of vision and courage to allow us to do this work. I remember wrestling with God. I don't want to just spend my life working on something without having it a chance to solve it. And in the middle of that wrestling, there was a movie, a documentary that came out called Waiting for Superman. The guy who made that documentary also made An Inconvenient Truth. So he's a very gifted documentarian. And I was living in Atlanta, and I was asked, the movie was going to premiere in Atlanta, and they invited me and a few other people at the end of the film to go up on sort of stage and sort of have a panel discussion about the movie because of the work I was doing around the country in education. I didn't know anything about the movie, so I said sure. And I'm watching the documentary, and if you haven't seen it, it basically chronicles poor families, inner city, who are applying to a local charter school. And what happens sometimes with high-performing charter schools is they may have like 400 seats, right? Grades, whatever. But the number of applicants to that is like in the thousands, because these parents know this is the only good shot my kid has, because the local neighborhood schools are crappy. And so there's a lottery where the parents literally, and they pull numbers out of a thing and you decide. So it chronicles these four families, and the movie culminates in the lottery draw, and you see two of the families win, and you see two of the families not win, and how devastated and heartbroken they are. And I watched this, and at the end of the movie, there's tears streaming down my face. And I'm not an overly emotional guy. And I remember thinking to myself, sitting in the movie theater, I got to pull this together. I've got to go up in like a minute. The credits are about to roll. And so I go up, and I don't remember all that I said and talked about it. I remember on the drive home saying to God, where did that emotion come from? And I remember thinking, I've got to get to the bottom of that emotion. I've got to figure that out. There's something in that that's triggered my heart. And what I realized as I was continued to process in the days and the weeks was, I knew the unit of change had to move from trying to turn around a school district to trying to turn around a school. Parents don't send their kids to a district, they send them to a local school. That's where you could actually begin to build buy-in and create a potentially sustainable and scalable model. That insight kept me pushing, and I started researching. There was an author, Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School, that has this disruptive innovation theory, and he applied it to education. He wrote a book called Disrupting Class. And the basic premise was the key to unlocking education, the key to changing our country's trajectory, is to personalize learning for each and every student. We have this batch manufacturing way of educating kids. We group them by age, put them in a classroom, and we teach them all the same way for the same amount of time in the same learning style. Completely ignoring that kids have different learning styles, learn at different rates, have different starting points. We don't personalize at all. Every other aspect of our society is becoming more personalized, right? In terms of the cup of coffee I buy at Starbucks, or the book that I order at Amazon, and the music that I listen to, or the news feeds that I get. It's completely personalized to my taste. And so what if we could leverage technology to create an individual learning pathway for each student that was unique to their learning style, unique to their rate of growth and progress? And so I started having this idea, and I went to Alvarez and Marcel, and I said, I want to do this. And they were kind of like, hey, we're a corporate turnaround firm. That's really cool, but I don't know if this is going to fly. And I told them, it's funny, they're not, I remember Brian Marcel saying to me, Sajan, this sounds like it's your calling, which is a very weird thing for the head of a Wall Street-based corporate turnaround firm to use to you. But I think it was, and it almost took me aback, and then I realized, wow, if it's that evident to him, it must be really present in me. And I remember flying home from New York. It was my end-of-year partner review. And I remember thinking, I got to do this. I got to double down. It's not the time to go slow. So I left the firm, and January 2011, and started this nonprofit called Matchbook Learning. And the idea was to go into the worst performing schools, the bottom 5%, and we would personalize learning for each student, give them each a laptop, digital content, digital assessments. And we started in Detroit, actually, was our very first one. But in January 2011, when I left the firm, keep in mind, this is the height of the recession, right? And I just had this idea, this concept in mind. I hadn't written down. Had research and notes and stuff, but no funding, no business plan, just this compelling sort of idea that I believed in. About a month later, it's February 2011. The house is quiet. My wife has taken our 3 school-age kids to school. And so I'm in my bed, and the house is quiet. I'm alone, and I get up and I realize, I don't really have anything to do today. I don't have any meetings. I don't have any calls, and this fear comes over me. And this thought, like, Sajan, you are the dumbest man on the face of the planet. You're the only breadwinner, a family of 5, in the height of the country's worst recession in decades, and you left this amazing paying job for an idea. And as soon as that fear came over me, 2 questions popped into my mind. I'll never forget these 2 questions. They just popped in. And the first question is, God, do you love me? And the second question was, God, is it okay if I fail? Truth of the matter is I was afraid of failing. What if this doesn't work out? I got to go back to Alvarez and Marcel with my tail between my legs, embarrassed to all my friends. What will my parents say? What will my in-laws say? But as soon as I gave voice to those 2 questions, I didn't hear an audible voice, but I felt deep in my soul that the answer to those 2 questions, God, do you love me, and is it okay if I fail, was yes and yes. And as soon as I felt that, I was good. I'm like, I'm okay. I can go. And so we started. We started with the bottom 5% school in Detroit. In 2 years, it got an award from the state as a school with a top 5 growth rate. We prototyped again. Second school, just to give you context, bottom 5% school, 7 out of 832 kids were proficient on the state exam in reading or math. 7, not 7%, 7 kids out of 832. 1 year later, same kids, 2/3 of the kids were making multiple years worth of growth in a single year. 5th highest gains of any school in the city. Third school, similar statistics. We took over our first charter school failing in Newark 2 years ago. Our school, our staff. We took over 2 more schools in Detroit this past year. We're building out an open source technology platform called Spark that captures this methodology. And this year we're creating an accelerator to help train other schools on this methodology. So here's I want to share with you a little framework. Clicker. Sorry, you can't see that too well, so I'll narrate, and we can email this out as well. There's not hard copies, but when you think about your calling and your vision, I think what I would say is start with what you're excellent at, or what you can be excellent at. I think the core of God's calling starts there. Our biggest witness, our biggest apologetic to our world is the excellence in the marketplace that we bring. Our skills should, in fact, be. If we're not excellent at what we do, we're not going to be a very effective apologetic. The second question is, what's the redemptive edge? That's why I got into turnarounds in the first place. So what's broken either in your industry or in your organization that you can redeem and restore? There's a part of God's calling in that. The third is, what frustrations do you have in your current work? Push on that, press on that. It was the frustrations in my work, in the work that I was doing, that unlocked for me insights about how God might use those skills to apply in a redemptive way. Fear. So as you begin to craft this vision around your pursuit of a calling, the question is, inevitably, there's going to be fears involved. If you're doing something worthy of the skills and abilities God's give you, fear will come, without a doubt. And you're going to have to process through some negative turns. It's inevitable. I shared you with what my 2 questions were that I had to face that morning. Your 2 questions might be different. I think a big fear a lot of us men have is, how will we provide? If I do something risky, what will happen to my standard of living that I and my family and my children and my wife enjoy? We have to face those fears with faith. I was really fascinated by the fact that every story has 3 acts. If you go to film school anywhere in the country, there's a book called by Robert McKee called Story. And it basically outlines the structure of every story. And every story has 3 acts. And you probably remember this vaguely from like your high school English class. And the first act, the point of the first act, the whole point of Act 1 in the story is the inciting incident. There's an inciting incident that draws the protagonist into the story, right? So think the most dramatic one is like those Mission Impossible movies where he gets the tape and it's like, Ethan Hawke, do you choose to accept your mission? This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. There's something that, otherwise the hero's just going along. All of a sudden something draws them into a bigger story. If you think about your career, if you think about your calling, there was some inciting incident that got you into the line of work that you're in right now. Something. It could have been a person, event, an experience. Reflect on that, because that's part of the hand of God. Act 2, the culmination of Act 2 is these sort of turns. You have positive turns where things go well for the hero and negative turns. And at the apex of Act 2 in your calling, in your story, you're not sure how it's going to turn out. You think of a great movie. There's a point in the movie, usually at the height of Act 2, where you're like, the hero doesn't know if he's going to save the day. At the height of your Act 2, you're not going to know if you're going to make it or not. And then Act 3, of course, is the climax and resolution. This gets a sense of, what does it look like when you apply your skills in a redemptive way? What does it look like? What does it look like when it's solved? Part of what we're narrating and dreaming of, what does it look like when every child in this country, regardless of zip code, regardless of background, regardless of race or socioeconomic status, realizes his or her potential? We don't actually talk about leverage and data very much when we think about calling, which is such a shame. We do this in our businesses all the time. You guys in finance understand leveraging incredibly well. But if you're going to take on something of significance, what's the leverage in that? For me, it was like, geez, you know what? We know kids do well when they are homeschooled, when they're tutored in a one-on-one environment, but financially it's not possible to give every student their own teacher. But what if we could accomplish that digitally? What if we could give them their learning path, give them instantaneous feedback, replicate many of those same features that a tutor does? And then how will you capture and communicate that? Stakeholder map, identify all the people or all the stakeholders that will be affected by your calling. And what is their unique need as it relates to your calling? For us, when we map this out, we have teachers in one box, we have students in another box, we have parents in another box, we have the community in another box. And through our understanding of their needs, we begin to articulate what we're doing. What happens is most people think, well, this is my calling, this is my vision, I explain it in the same way to each stakeholder. They won't get it. They won't buy in. Because what teachers want, yeah, they want the school turned around, but what they really want is they want purpose in their profession. Students, they want a place that's fun. They want school to be fun. The community, they want restored pride in a broken school. If you think about your work you do, there's different stakeholders that are vested in that, or you want them to be vested. So you better articulate what you're doing in ways that meet their unique needs. Lastly, and this comes all together, this is the framework that I'm talking to you about. Your vision comprises of what you can be excellent at, applied in a redemptive way. There's some part of your organization or company or business or industry that's broken. How do you restore and redeem that? Follow where your frustrations are, because those frustrations will lead you to insight. As that vision shapes, you're going to confront fears, address those questions with faith, be honest about those fears. Third, the what of what you do, the actual work itself. Remember the importance of story, of engaging people, the different stakeholders. Think about how you leverage your skills in that redemptive way. And what's the data or evidence that reinforces that? And then lastly, apply that work to the various stakeholders, connecting with them, meeting their felt needs. Because what you'll do is they'll help reinforce and reinvigorate your vision. And it'll be a cyclical process that you'll constantly revisit, improving and articulating your vision, addressing the fears as they continue or new ones emerge, creating leverage and evidence in a way that culminates in a story that impacts stakeholders because they connect to that story. And you'll get a sense of what God wants for you, which is to basically pursue the best version that He has designed for you to be, the most Christ-like you can be in the work that He's called you to be, to pursue that. Thanks very much for letting me share.
Fantastic.
Thanks.